Welcome once again to Everyday Holiness, a Faith ND podcast brought to you by the Notre Dame Alumni Association. This is again your host, Dan Allen, Associate Director of Spirituality and Service, and I'm glad to have you with us today, and I'm also pleased to be joined by Sister Mariana Koonce. Sister Mariana is a 1990 graduate of Notre Dame. Prior to religious life, she was known as Christina Koonce. She is a religious sister of mercy as well as a practicing physician. So I'm excited to get into those aspects and others of her story. But Sister Mariana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dan. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So we'll start at your beginnings. Where was home for you, and what were some memories of as a young person that you could share with us?
Sure. I grew up in Western Kentucky in a small town called Mayfield. It's in the middle of the Jackson Purchase, where the Ohio flows into the Mississippi. It's in that area of Western Kentucky. And it was a very blessed childhood. My mom and dad, my mom's a Polish Catholic from Buffalo, New York, and my dad a Southern Baptist from Western Kentucky. And they met in the Navy during the Vietnam War era in Alameda, California. So after they married and finished their naval service, they settled in Western Kentucky. So I have a brother and a sister. I'm the oldest of the three. So I was blessed to know my grandparents growing up, and that was very fond memories of spending time with my dad's parents who lived in the same town, and my mom's parents were in Buffalo, New York. So we were traveling back and forth a couple of times a year, getting to experience the Polish side of the family, and then also growing up in a small town. It was in some ways, it was a sheltered childhood. I often remember wishing I lived in a bigger city where more exciting things or there was more available. But after I grew up and I realized what's in big cities, I realized I had a very blessed
Small town
childhood.
life is okay, yeah.
Yeah. I was very blessed.
And in terms of your mom being a Catholic and your dad from the Baptist background, how did that shape your discussions and practice of faith as a child?
Well, of course, my mom was very faithful and faith-filled Catholic and insisted that we be raised Catholic. So we were baptized in the Catholic Church. When we got old enough, we went to Mass with her. When we were all old enough to start going to Mass, and my dad would join us for Mass on Saturday nights, and then he would go to the Baptist Church on Sunday mornings. We would sometimes participate in things at the Baptist Church, like Vacation Bible School, because we didn't have that necessarily in our parish. My dad liked to sing in the choir, so sometimes we would either join in a children's choir there or at least attend services there for special events and special offerings. So it was, I think my dad, of course, my mom contributed to Catholicism. My dad's side of the family were very faith-filled. I remember when we would sleep over with my grandparents, they liked to read the Bible every night before going to bed. So we would join in that activity. And my dad brought tithing to the family. So that was part of his tradition. And we, even with our $1 allowance, give us 10 dimes and we'd have 10 cents in the offertory. It was a good way to be exposed to the other ways of practicing the Christian faith. And I would say my dad did join the Catholic Church eventually. My mom never put any pressure on him to join until my brother was going to be a priest. And then he was a year from ordination when she finally said, "Are you going to be the only one in the family who doesn't receive communion from your son?"
Wow.
And so then he got to thinking, and he would relate that, well, I believe in all the miracles of Christ. I believe he changed water into wine. I believe he did this. I believe he did that. Why can't I not believe that he is present in the body and blood in the sacrament of the altar? And that's all it took. And then went through RCIA and entered the church in 2005, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And as you grew up and got to know your own talents and gifts, what were you drawn to? What did you enjoy doing?
Well, I remember wanting to be a doctor since I was in fourth grade. Just, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I was thinking, I like to be able to help people. How do you help people best? Well, you help them with their health. And so that was very simple. It's a very simple reasoning process. But I tend to be a very goal-directed person. So that's really what I set my sights on from a very early age. And though I considered other professions and other things, I like to read liked to read a lot. I would read National Geographic and Discovery Magazine and Smithsonian, and I liked to envision traveling. We didn't do a lot of overseas traveling. I like to take pictures. I like to ride a bicycle, but there was nothing really ever serious in anything else other than being a doctor. So that's why I went to Notre Dame, actually.
Yeah. Were there doctors in your family, or did you have any connection to that? It was just you felt called to it.
No, it's now I would say it's probably was a call, but at the time it just seemed like a good idea, I guess. It was my mom, after the Navy, finished college. My dad never finished college. My grandparents didn't go to college. I think there was a cousins in some extended part of the family that may have been a doctor, but no, obviously no Notre Dame connections in the family or anything. It was a brand new experience.
And I know religious life came later for you, and we'll definitely get to that. But knowing that now that you are, did you know anyone in religious life as a child who was kind of a model or mentor to you?
No, we didn't. We have occasionally had sisters at the parish. I think they were Ursulines, but they would come and go. There would some, not always, and as the number of religious shrunk over the years, sisters became less frequent and less visible. But no, I didn't have any exposure to religious growing up. Okay.
Good. Well, I think that's helpful to know in the sense of sometimes God's plan is unveiled over time, and we'll certainly hear about that. As it relates to Notre Dame, how did Notre Dame get on your radar, and how did that come about?
Well, I was getting ready to think about college and wanting to go to college. I liked school. I liked studying. Obviously, I wanted to be a doctor. My parents were very supportive of the concept. We weren't a wealthy family. How was this going to get paid for? They didn't shove it down my throat or say, oh, that's out of reach. They would just take one step at a time. And so I remember flipping the channels one day on a Saturday afternoon, and the Notre Dame football game came on, and I just happened to be at the time when the Notre Dame spotlight was broadcast. And I thought, oh, that looks good.
Yeah, those are some shiny helmets there.
Yeah, and the Golden Dome and the campus and everything. And these were not the good years of Notre Dame football.
Okay.
This was the Jerry Faust.
This would have been like Jerry Faust. I was going to say, is this Jerry Faust here?
So, but anyway, I was at a stage where I was getting hundreds of things in the mail for different colleges. How do you choose?
Yeah.
But we didn't. Our parish had a little grade school for a while, but we always went to public school and no exposure to Catholic school at all. But that was an attraction. And then, then one thing led to another, and I was able to go.
Wonderful, wonderful. So once you got here, you had this idea of becoming a doctor. Maybe this was your first exposure to Catholic education. What was the experience like in those early years at Notre Dame?
I had lived quite a sheltered life growing up in this small town, and I get to this big college where there's a lot of prep school, people who graduated from prep schools, and I was like, oh my goodness. But I found out that I had received actually a very excellent education in my little small town public school, and I was able to keep up with everybody and the academics, and I was in the marching band, so that was a good outlet and a good way to get introduced to people. And then I was able to do work study after my first semester. So I worked at the huddle. So you see everybody who comes through the huddle on game nights. And then,
all those quarter dogs, right?
Yeah. And then being in a chaplain in every dorm, a priest in every dorm, mass at night, masses in the dorm always available, the grotto, the basilica. I tended to gravitate towards the basilica and would usually attend mass there on Sundays. And it was, and then just the whole culture of Catholicism there, just even the fact that they announced the mass times at the end of the football games. Those little things like that, and then the Center for Social Concerns. I tried to get involved with different activities there. So it was really, it definitely expanded my world coming from little small town, Western Kentucky.
Great. Now, did this idea of becoming a physician, did you ever waver from that? Did you encounter organic chemistry and think, oh boy, this was this is a wild ride, or were you pretty set on that path the whole way?
No, I was set on that path the whole way, actually. I entered intending to do majoring in pre-professional studies so that I could go to medical school. And in those days, it was Father Walter who was the dean of that program, and he ran a pretty tight ship as far as if you wanted to go to medical school, this is what you were going to do. But I did manage to get permission to go on the London Studies program in my fall of junior year. It was at that time the only study abroad a pre-med major could do, because they would send a physics professor over, and I don't know if they still do that, but so I did do that, and that was just another eye-opening, just to open my worldview up to the larger world in general, but also just to see Catholicism in the United Kingdom at the time. Mm-hmm. We had mass at the dorms there, but I often would go to mass at a parish just to experience the parish life in London. And I remember seeking out some volunteer opportunities there, meeting sometimes with getting matched with a homeless woman with mental illness and just kind of spending some time with her. And she actually introduced me to some of the Christian Catholic martyrs there. So it was just a cultural explosion because of everything you get exposed to, but also just expanding my worldview of Catholicism as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's one of the gifts that we have as Catholics, that you can go lots of places in the world and still be connected to the church. It might be in a different language or different accent in your case, but yeah, that you get a sense of that more global church.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came to the end of your time at Notre Dame, there's some big decisions to make in terms of options for medical schools, what medical schools you can get into. Tell us about that time, if you would, please.
Yeah, so I'd gone to Notre Dame through a combination of scholarship, my parents contributing, work study, loans, and I needed to get to medical school. I needed medical school to be paid for, basically. I couldn't imagine taking out loans. I couldn't getting into that kind of debt that's required. I did want to serve the poor. I mean, that was part of my impetus. And so getting saddled with a lot of debt that might alter my professional choices, I just couldn't do it. Plus, my brother and sister were coming up behind me, and I couldn't sap all the family finances for medical school. So the Navy seemed like a good option. The Navy recruiter was always in the first floor of the library, and she made it really easy to sign up. So I never saw Air Force or Army. And plus, my parents having met in the Navy, there was a sort of a natural family attachment there. So yeah, I signed on the dotted line to have the Navy pay for med school, and then I promised to pay back.
So what does that look like in terms of med school in the Navy and then service afterwards?
Yeah. So at the time, so what I received was called the Health Profession Scholarship Program. So you could go to any U.S. medical school that you can get into, and the military will pay for it, and then you pay back one for one. For every year they pay for, you have to pay a year. It does not count the internship and residency. So you're looking in my case, I was looking at a 7-year commitment for med school. So I just, again, looking around for medical schools, it wasn't a very scientific exploration of medical schools. The Notre Dame winters had gotten a little long sometimes, so I looked south at Tulane University, as far south as you could go. And it was, at that time, it was usually in the top 20 list of U.S. medical schools. And I applied to some other medical schools too, of course, to a state school for Kentucky as a Kentucky resident, and even applied where my grandparents lived in Buffalo, New York. But I figured, well, if the military is going to pay and I'm going to have to pay back, I might as well go to the most expensive medical school I get into. So it wasn't necessarily the most rational choice, but
more bang for your buck that way.
Exactly. So I ended up at Tulane for medical school.
Okay. And of course, again, you've had this idea of being a physician this whole time, but then when you get into the real study of it and sometimes the practice of it, were there any times where it gave you pause, or you thought, maybe I want to divert into this area of medicine?
Yeah, I would say after having spent since fourth grade shooting for medical school, and then now suddenly on the cusp and getting into medical school, you start to think, well, should I take some time off? Should I go do some volunteer time? But that in those days, it wasn't common to take a so-called gap year. Usually you took a gap year because you didn't get in. And then it was a forced gap year.
Spun it positively, yeah.
Yes. I was a little bit afraid of losing my momentum if I took some time off. So I pushed through, but there were times where I thought, gosh, maybe I did rush into this and I should have taken some time. Medical school is difficult. You're ever increasing bigger ocean and you feel like an ever smaller fish. And at that time, women in medical, I think my medical school class is about a third women.
Okay.
So it was coming up. And there were some women who I remember that had taken more circuitous paths. There was a woman in her 40s, a mother of 4, and I thought, oh my goodness, how are you here? There's another woman, remember, she had been a triathlete and like a personal trainer, and she had been put on the wait list, but she just decided to show up to the first day of medical school because she heard that sometimes there's people who don't show up and you can just take their place, and sure enough.
Wow.
So she was a bold type. So there were some non-traditional students at the time that were there, but most of us were young and pretty much almost immediately out of undergraduate. And yeah, so it was challenging to keep going at sometimes, to think, oh, that maybe I could have taken some time off after all, but just persevered through those times. Again, being very goal directed, it was just like, you have to be goal directed to go into medicine because it takes so long. The training is so long that you just have to know that there will be an end in sight.
Yeah, and as you get to the end of that, I assume some of your choices are restricted in terms of you've got this Navy service. What does it look like? What are the options for a physician in the Navy?
Right. So I wanted to go into family medicine because of the breadth of family medicine, and also that's what I had been exposed to growing up. We had a family doc who took care of everything from the time we were born practically to when we went off to college. And Tulane at the time wasn't known for its family medicine training, but we was part of helping to start a family medicine interest group there. And we did some fun little side trips. Like most people don't know, there's actually a leper colony in the United States that was started down in New Orleans, when leprosy was a feared disease and people could be quarantined down there. So I got involved in things like that during my medical school, but choosing a practice right at the time. Again, this is a long time ago, so things may have changed. I probably have, but the process is you would apply for a military medical residency, and sometimes you could get, a waiver to go into a civilian medical residency. But at the time, the preference was to train the doctors in house. So I applied for a family medicine residency in Washington State, in Bremerton. I did 2 student away rotations at military hospitals. One, I got to the rotation and they said, well, we're glad you're here, but our program's closing. Like, oh, okay, great. And then Bremerton. So that was the one it's a kind of a match. It's like a match, but they have their own selection process. Mm-hmm. So I remember getting called by the detailer after they had their selection process, and he said, well, how would you like to go to Hawaii? I said, Hawaii? I never thought about Hawaii.
Yeah.
So I ended up being sent to an Army residency internship in Tripler Army Medical Center in Hawaii for a year. Now I see it as God's providence. At the time, it was a disappointment because I really wanted this other residency in Bremerton. It was a family practice only residency, so you're not in competition with any other specialties or anything for training. And I liked the Puget Sound area. It was a lovely area. And so it was a disappointment. But in hindsight, I can see God's hand leading through this. So.
Mm-hmm. And so you go to Hawaii, you're doing this residency, and then you have some options for further service in the Navy, and you have then options to get out or stay, right?
Right. So, I mean, just in brief, when I was in often did not go straight through internship and residency. It was very common to do a year of internship and then be sent out into the active force to be an active physician in the operational area. So I knew that, and I knew that I would probably not get accepted back into Bremerton unless I had done that. So I volunteered to just go on a ship for 2 years. So I ended up doing a shipboard tour as a shipboard physician in the USS Blue Ridge out of Yokosuka, Japan. So talk about another eye-opening experience being in a foreign culture. And so I did that for 2 years, finished my residency in Bremerton. So I was accepted then into the Bremerton program that I'd wanted to go to all along, finished my family medicine residency there. And then it was time to select for another place after residency. Yeah, and I didn't get offered any of the places I really wanted to go. So I just took another ship. So I did another ship. So I did 2 shipboard tours as a Navy physician, which is very unusual. But so that one was home ported out of San Diego, which had the advantage of my sister and her husband lived in San Diego. So at least I got to spend a little bit of time with them sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, quite a varied experience for a physician.
Okay. Yeah. That's helpful to understand that a bit. I know you talked about your growth in faith at Notre Dame and the many opportunities to you there. Sometimes, of course, you get out there in medical school or professional world or the military, and you have to work harder to keep that faith going because you're busy. Not everybody's involved in that. How did you keep your faith alive during that time?
Well, I always went to Mass. I mean, I always went to Mass. So wherever I was, I would either find a parish in Tulane. I would often worship at the student parish in the undergraduate campus or a local parish. In the Navy, I often went on base to the naval base, to the parish there, and even played with their choir because I was still trying to keep up my clarinet skills, so I'd play with the choir. On the ships, I was very fortunate that I always had a Catholic chaplain on board the ships. And in fact, my first ship, the Blue Ridge, it was a CSC chaplain, Father Doug Smith, who, as far as I know, is still retired at Corby Hall. So
yeah, he's a wonderful priest. I know Father Doug well.
Yeah. So he was my first Navy chaplain on board my very first ship. I remember meeting him my first day. And so they offered daily Mass. So actually on the ships, I was able to go to daily Mass and get back to doing that. I think it may have been actually my first experience of daily Mass because I don't think I was a daily Mass goer at Notre Dame. But yeah, so that was all part of that journey, that path that God was opening up for me. So,
and then you get to the end, you've done your time, so to speak, for the military, paid that back. What are the options in front of you, and what did you choose to do?
So it was, again, I did my 7 years, and I thought, well, I can either stay to 20 or I should just get out. And I didn't see myself staying until 20, so I got out. And I had enjoyed Washington State, and so I thought, I think I'll just try to go back to Washington State and see what kind of practice. And that was my first real discernment was, okay, God, of these practices in Washington State, which one should I go to? So I think if religious life had crossed my mind at that point, and it could have, I was not open at all, not open.
Okay.
The intent, try private practice, maybe settle down, maybe get married, but I was not open at all to religious life at that point. So I was settled on private practice in Washington State.
Okay, yes.
Those were God's options. Private practice in Washington State. He could point out which one, but that's what's the box.
narrowed it down.
Right.
So when does religious life enter the picture, and how?
Yeah. So I usually tell people I did everything I wanted to do God first, and then got around to asking God what He wanted. So, and that's basically how it happened. I found a practice in Washington State. It was actually an evangelical Christian practice that was attached to a Catholic hospital in the town of Pasco, which is a medium-sized city in southeast Washington. But, the transition from Navy practice, and especially operational practice, which is a totally different kind of way of seeing patients, to private practice, where you're increasingly having to pay attention to how fast you see patients, how many patients you see in a day, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
That was challenging. And so I kind of got a little restless there. It took some, I did an initial 2 years with that. My first contract was 2 years. And I thought, let me see what else might be out there. I took some time to do some locum tenens. And then I ended up starting my own practice. And when I had been in the Navy in San Diego, I'd bought a condo. And of course, home prices in San Diego tend to go up. So I didn't sell right away. I tried to be a long distance property owner, but it was a pain. And so I sold that property, had some extra money. And so I thought, maybe I'll try starting my own practice. I wanted to do a low cost practice for the working uninsured. So
Sure.
this is all, of course, before Obamacare and the availability of Medicaid. So there was this large working uninsured population, people who had jobs but couldn't afford health care and were not insured. So I was trying to do a low cost practice for them. But it wasn't really taking, and I was at a decision point where I needed to do something had to change. And so then this is what I would say, this is my first discernment where I didn't put God in a box. I just said, okay, Lord, now what? Well, then a number of things started happening. We got a new pastor at the parish. He started preaching where it sounds like every sermon is directed towards you and your pastor. And then he started a parish-wide discernment with a called and gifted workshop. And so I went through that. And then that opened up, that gifts inventory opened up the possibility of consecrated single life. And I thought, I hadn't thought about this, religious life or consecrated life in general. Mm-hmm. So I ended up talking to the pastor about it. But in my first meeting, I said to myself, if he doesn't bring it up, I'm not mentioning it. Okay. So he didn't bring it up because the gift they had scored highest in that gifts inventory was mercy. So we explored that first. And then he suggested I read St. Faustina's diary for the Divine Mercy. So I did that, working out on the treadmill. At the gym, I would be reading St. Faustina's diary while everybody else is doing whatever. So, and then I met again, and I said, this time I got up the nerve to say, there's this other gift supposedly for consecrated life. What do you think about that? And he says, well, you could look into a couple of orders, and that's where he suggested the Religious Sisters of Mercy, because he knew of us from his time in Rome. So I did. I looked us up on the website and I said, oh, wow, they have sisters, they have physicians, they have their own clinic. This could be real.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh is right. Yeah. So I visited in May and I entered in September.
Okay. So for those who may not be aware, can you give us a sense of some of the history and charism of the Religious Sisters of Mercy?
Sure. So the Religious Sisters of Mercy were founded in Dublin, Ireland in 1831 by Venerable Catherine Macaulay. This was her vision. Original vision was for care of the sick poor, especially distressed women. So her very first mission was a home for distressed women that would teach them skills so that they could gain employment, stay off the streets, and be able to support families. And then she gradually expanded to visiting the sick poor and was able to gain access to Dublin hospitals. And then the sisters trained in nursing, became nurses, and they spread like wildfire. So the Sisters of Mercy came to the United States in 1843 after Mother Catherine died. She died in 1841. So the American foundation was from Mother Frances Xavier Ward, and spread throughout the United States. So most people have encountered Mercy Hospital and Mercy High School, some Mercy Apostolate. So Mother Catherine instituted into her original constitutions a vow to the fourth vow. So besides the usual three vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, she instituted a fourth vow of service to the poor, sick, and ignorant, which is pretty much everybody in some way, shape, or form can fall into that.
Covers us all at some point.
Categories, exactly. So we take a fourth vow of service to the poor, sick, and ignorant, and particularly through the spiritual and corporal works of mercy is how we serve. So in 1973, so after the Vatican Council encouraged a period of experimentation amongst religious and encouraged religious to go back to the spirit of their founders, the Sisters of Mercy, a group of Sisters of Mercy, formed an experiment in Grand Rapids at a Mercy hospital there. And from that experiment we were encouraged by Rome to become a separate institute of mercy. So our mother house now is in Alma, Michigan.
Okay.
And so we're the Religious Sisters of Mercy of Alma, Michigan, but we're part of that large mercy family that was founded by Mother Catherine in Dublin.
Okay. So for you, what did that mean in terms of travel and formation? And also you were older probably than some of your fellow women in formation.
Right. Oh, that was a challenge. So of course I had to I had to close a practice. I had my own medical practice, had to close that. I had to sell a house, had to empty the house. I had to, and oh, by the way, I didn't say this part. So my parents, I had invited them to come out to live with me in Washington State. They were getting older, and my dad was getting to retirement age. And and I had a big house, and I didn't seem like marriage was coming to anything. So I was like, well, why don't you come and live with me? So my first call to my parents that I was even discerning religious life was, well, Mom and Dad, you're welcome to come and visit, but don't bring the moving truck because I'm going to be going to visit these sisters.
Okay.
And then my mom, who doesn't normally like a lot of abrupt changes, just said, oh, maybe that's why the house didn't sell. So she took it very well. And so anyway, but she came out and helped me pack up the house. And we had this, in those days, we used to ask our incoming women to sew their own postulant dresses. And I had no idea how to sew anything.
Yeah.
So Mom knew how to sew. So she sewed the postulant dresses while I was packing, trying to close the practice and tell my patients what on earth I was doing. And then you enter your first year as a postulancy. So you're not in full habit, but you're starting to live the life. You're coming together. I was in a rather large class of 7 women, and we had a 20-year age range. So
Wow.
I was the oldest, and the youngest was 20. And so, yeah, it was a challenge after being on your own for so many years and living your life. So it was a challenge.
What were the moments of consolation and confirmation along the way? I mean, this is a huge leap of faith. You're uprooting your whole life and finances and sort of trajectory of life. And really, as you said, trusting the Lord at this time. What were some little moments of grace along the way that said, I think the Lord is with me in this?
The first thing when I visited the sisters, it was just such a deep sense of this is home. This is home. This is where I meant to be. And that really stayed with me through all those challenges of all the practical, logistical challenges of packing up a house. In 3 months, like I said, I visited in May and entered in September. So it was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But it was also just the realization I really was truly at that turning point where I knew something needed to change. And I'm like, well, I asked the Lord what I should do, and seems to be what he's telling me to do. And then I was going to spiritual direction with my pastor at the time. And I didn't even know what spiritual direction was, but I realized after the facts that's what I was doing. And so I had little pieces, but it was just kind of that, okay, well, I asked, and he gave me a sign, and I better follow it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was it. And then I will say during postulancy, I discovered the Stations of the Cross. And we have these beautiful set of outdoor stations around our postulant house. And just learning to take whatever it was that I was struggling with in that moment and uniting it with our Lord's Passion. That got me through postulancy, but it's gotten me through everything. We do our communal Stations of the Cross every Friday, but I know for myself that I need to do the stations regularly just to stay united with the Lord's Passion. And that puts everything else that I'm going through in perspective when I do that.
Yeah, I love that because there's all the other players too, in terms of the grief of Mary and the help of Simon and Veronica, the weeping women, the Jesus encountering his humanity and falling down. It's so rich and so applicable to many aspects of our lives. When it came to the point of taking final vows, did you feel ready for that? And what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was, how can I answer that? My formation was, the whole time was challenging, but I finally came to a point where I basically said to myself, well, again, going back to that first moment, go back, remember your first love. I asked the Lord, this is where he wants me. this is where the will of God is for me. And once I could finally just grasp that and commit to that, then there was great peace. And so I was able to ask for final vows, and they accepted me. So,
praise God.
part of our vow formula is Mother Mary McGreevy, or whoever our superior general is at the time. I ask you to confirm me in the truth of this act. And so it's a mutual discernment. The Institute discerns, you discern. And we say that formation doesn't end until you enter the pearly gates. So
right.
I've been perpetually professed since 2016, and I'm still continuing to grow in faith, hope, and love, and knowledge and love of God.
Yeah, still on the journey as we all are, even after you make some of those big decisions and vows, whatever the case may be. Now, I'm thinking about this dynamic. A lot of times you hear people who enter religious life or priesthood, and then within that they discern with their order, their bishop, where you might be. You had this prior professional experience as a physician. How did that conversation go with your superiors of where you would be doing ministry as both a sister and a physician?
Right. Well, so you never enter religious life with the expectation of being assigned to any particular one apostolate we have women who see sister physicians and have this desire to go to medical school and enter with that desire that they may be assigned to go to medical school. But you can't enter with those expectations. You enter because it's the will of God, and then you accept the discernment. But it is a dialogue, and it is a process of accepting God's will for you as manifested through the decisions of the superiors. Now, for me, I so far have been assigned mostly to medical practice, but not always. So our first year of apostolancy, we're not in any kind of active apostolate, and then in our first year of canonical novitiate, you're not in an active apostolate. So our second year, when we're sent out on mission, I was sent out. We had a clinic in Jackson, Minnesota at the time. So I was sent out to that clinic to practice medicine. But then my first year of temporary vows, I was asked to work in faith formation for the Diocese of Winona. So that was a big jump. I was like, okay, whoa. I don't know if my own faith is that well formed to lead a faith formation for a whole diocese. So that was a good experience, though, working with other people who knew more than I did, but being able to use the organizational skills that I'd acquired in the Navy, and as formation goes, you realize you start to acquire more through formation than you realize, than other people. So then in my second year of temporary vows, I was asked to go to the Diocese of Knoxville to help start a mobile clinic for the poor of Appalachia. So I did that for 7 years, and we started during the Year of Faith. And it was truly an act of faith to start a free mobile clinic for the poor. I used to tell our board, there's no business model in which a free mobile clinic makes sense. It's complete reliance on divine providence. So that was definitely a growth experience in faith and truly relying on divine providence to get that up and running. And then God responded. He sent so many wonderful people to help with that project. So Tennessee is known as the volunteer state, and it lives up to that name. But then I was asked to do a 3-year master's program at Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C., and I didn't practice medicine except for a few months in during that. And then now this most recent venture is I'm at not a free clinic, but a Catholic Charities clinic in the Diocese of Lansing. Okay. So at any moment, you could be asked to drop what you're doing and go do something else, and it might be related to medicine, and it might not be related to medicine, but you trust in God's providence through the whole thing that He's leading you where you want to go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that vow of obedience is a real thing, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we take it seriously. And but it is free. It is freeing. I remember trying to do discernment before my limited experience with discernment, before being a sister. How do you know the will of God for you? You try to look for these signs, and you consult with friends and people you trust. But, it's the vow of obedience makes it pretty straightforward.
Yeah, sometimes in that the throes of discernment, people want a phone call from God or a letter or a message, but obedience, you really get the message and says, this is what we think you should do.
Exactly. And Mother Catherine McCauley wrote a sushi pay, sort of similar to St. Ignatius Loyola's, but hers is, my God, I am thine for time and eternity. Teach me to cast myself entirely into the arms of thy loving providence, the most divine, unlimited confidence in thy compassionate, tender pity. Grant that whatever thou dost ordain or permit may be acceptable to me. We pray that every day. And we try to live that every day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, you mentioned that your brother was ordained a priest. What was it like were your parents still living during the time of you took final vows and he was ordained as a priest? What was it like to have both a religious sister and a priest in your family?
Well, I think it's just a mark of the generosity of my parents. So my brother entered religious life first. So he is my baby brother and my senior in religion. So he was, and after I entered religious life, I would reflect back on watching him through his religious formation and thinking, oh, that's what he was doing. I didn't understand it at all at the time, watching from the outside, and I had no aspirations, no thoughts that I would ever be in religious formation myself. So I have a brother is a priest, my sister's married, and myself. And it's a great joy and privilege in our family that to have all those states of life represented. And it's a mark of generosity with my parents that they were willing to offer two of their children back to the Lord.
Right. Yeah, that is very, very special. You've talked several times about the love of the poor, and that's part of that fourth vow that you take. How did that play out in terms of this mixture between being both a religious sister and a physician? Have you been able to serve the poor better, being both of those things, than you could have done so separately?
Yes. So it was part of my aspirations to serve the poor, as I mentioned early on. As for becoming religious, it was part of why I went to the Navy, was to get my debt paid off so I wouldn't have those kinds of things saddling me down, forcing certain choices in practice. It was part of why I wanted to start my own practice, to try to serve the working uninsured. And that didn't work out as well as I had hoped for it. But I think it was all part of God's, working. It's all part of his providential plan in terms of then leading me to religious life, where I get to start a mobile clinic that serves the poor of Appalachia. And I'd grown up in Western Kentucky, which is the opposite side of the state from Appalachia. But I remember my mom saying, well, maybe when you become a doctor, you can come back and serve the poor of Appalachia. Well, just did it in a different state.
Yeah.
But also being a sister brings more to medicine than just good medical care. I mean, we of course strive, good medical care is the foundation, but it's also that the religious aspect of why we're doing this. We're doing this to serve God. We're doing this to uphold the dignity of the person that we're seeing. We're doing this in order to see Christ in them. And it's like Matthew 25, whatever you do for the least of my brothers and sisters, you do for me. So it's to really see Christ in those people we serve, and to bring them to their own self-awareness. As Sisters of Mercy, we talk about elevating situations of need. So some religious orders, like the Missionaries of Charity, for instance, their particular charism is about accompaniment and really being with the poor in solidarity with them, living their life. But we really strive to elevate the situation of need, to whether it's in the people we serve as a direct service to the poor, but also for our colleagues in medicine who are also sometimes impoverished in their own ways. And that's one of the reasons why we get asked to do masters in theology. And so many of our sister physicians, really from the beginning that we've had, eventually get a master's in theology so that we can serve the wider medical profession as well. So we bring all of that into our service as sisters. That's a little bit different than, obviously, than a secular or a lay person serving that same population.
Yeah, I'm sure that you are a gift to your colleagues and patients in a way that others wouldn't be able to be because of all that richness of your formation and that background. We're here at this point in your life when a lot of the questions have been answered in terms of God's will for you, and you talked about you're still going to continue to do that for the rest of your life. But it strikes me that there were other times in your life when there were a lot more open questions, and you probably felt a lot of uncertainty. If you could go back and talk to yourself, or you could talk to someone in a similar place as you were during those times of uncertainty, what bits of advice or counsel would you give to someone in those when the questions are more wide open?
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, the foundation is always, of course, recourse to the sacraments. So going to Mass as often as possible, certainly on Sundays, but daily Mass if possible. And I didn't speak about this, but part of my discernment process for any religious life was that I found myself suddenly going to confession more than twice a year.
Started to become aware of some things, yeah.
What am I going on? What is going on here? I'm going to confession now. I started going to at the parish I was attending, we had a perpetual adoration chapel. So I signed myself up for an hour at some, I don't think it was quite in the middle of the night, but it was a challenging hour. Let's just say it was a challenging hour to force myself to get there and be that. So putting ourselves in the presence of the Lord, of course, and cleaning the windshields of our souls so that the light can shine is going to be always the basics of discernment. And then I think seeking spiritual counsel, having, like I said, the pastor I was working with to help sort through all those different signals you're getting that you can't, like, is that a sign? Is that a sign? Is that a sign? Is that a good sign? Is it a bad sign? Having a person. I mean, I had friends who were well-meaning and well-intended, good Christians. I didn't have a lot of Catholic friends, but well-meaning, well-intended Christians, friends. But having one person to help you navigate your discernment as a spiritual director, I just found extremely helpful. And then now, like I said, for me, the key to the spiritual life is, of course, union with our Lord in the Passion through the Stations of the Cross, especially. They're not just for Lent, as far as I'm concerned. So if you're ever going through any kind of struggle or challenge or anything, doing those Stations of the Cross and meditating upon them in the light and uniting your struggle, your challenge, whatever it is you're wrestling with our Lord in his Passion, will do wonders.
A lot of wisdom in that, for sure. One more question about medicine, and then we'll end with holiness. How has medicine changed over the time of your being a physician? And what do you think is most needed now in terms of those who are practicing medicine to help, to be the most helpful to society?
Yeah, of course, medicine. So one of the things that came out of my 3 years of studies at Dominican House of Studies was that I had been practicing as a substance dualist my whole life, which means that I believed in God, I believed in the soul, I believed in the afterlife, I believed in heaven. But I didn't know how those things worked, and I didn't know how that interaction with the body happened. And so really you end up going down the road of materialism and really focusing on the body. And that's what medicine does. It really focuses on the body and how things work. And it's just incredible, the expansion of our knowledge in how the body works, how much level of detail we know. And I'll look things up now that I may have learned in medical school, and I'll look at, and it's just the nth level of detail about how these molecules and these sensors and the cell wall and all these things of how our body works. And yet we still don't, in medicine, always have the view of our end, our final end with God. That all of this is still just a small bit of what God has done and is doing and is working, and that our end is transcendent. So it's not in this life, and it's not in the body as we know it. So health is just a means, and not always a direct means to achieving our end in God. So I think for Catholic physicians in particular, the challenge is not to get sucked into materialism. I mean, we have to know it to be good physicians, and we have to know what we need to know to be good physicians in this day and age. But people are longing for the transcendent. They know there's something missing in their life, and they don't always know what it is. And it's this transcendent dimension that's missing. And so for Catholic physicians to be able to shift the perspective of helping people through their health to shoot for higher things. I think that's what we can offer to medicine today, because the loss of human dignity is a big one. Now the big talk is AI. What is that? And how is that going to change society? What constitutes being a person? What constitutes being a person? Here we have, you can't even get human embryos classified as persons, and yet there's people talking about robots being persons. I mean, so we've got the wider world has no foundation for how they think. And I think particularly Catholic physicians who can know their faith and know the foundations can do a lot to shift the dialogue to a bigger horizon.
Yeah, to just be a voice of moral reason and a voice of, as you said, beyond the material, but to understand our home ultimately is in God. So I think that's a great connection then to holiness, because not only do we work on our health and we work on being healthy physically, but we work on our spiritual health too. Who have been the people who have shown you the way in terms of a holy life?
Well, I think first, of course, my parents. 55 years of marriage, through thick and thin, coming from diverse backgrounds. It was not easy going there, and we never had a lot of money growing up, and it was not, being a Catholic in the South wasn't easy for my mom, being a Polish Catholic, entering into a Baptist family. So that perseverance of my parents in faith was a big witness. And even in their later years, my dad ended up having Alzheimer's and some other neurological conditions that rendered him bedbound for 6.5 years, almost 7 years. And my mom took care of him in bed those almost 7 years. And she had a private helper come in during those days, a couple of days a week, but pretty much she was the one rolling, cleaning, taking care of him, feeding. Her whole life revolved around my dad. And so I think of that when I'm tempted to complain about something or other to myself. I think, but there was my mom every day, and she wouldn't complain, and she wouldn't put dad in a nursing home because she wanted to do it. And so to me, that's the hallmark of a holy life. There is that commitment. And then I think of the volunteers of the mobile clinic in Knoxville in particular, their commitment to people. They really so generous, just some of the most generous people living out their faith, helping the poor in East Tennessee, showing up, offering their assistance. There's one in particular, her name was Judy Schmidt, who I call her the co-founder of the clinic, because I don't think the clinic could have come into existence if she hadn't been there saying, "Sister, what can I do for you?" It's like, everything. I need everything. So people like that who just are living their Catholic faith in the real, offering themselves, time, talent, and treasure, truly. And then we have some sisters in our community, some older sisters who are just those models of perseverance, to fidelity, day in and day out. We just celebrated one sister's 65th Jubilee in religious life. 65 years, and she's still on assignment. She's not retired in a nursing home. She's on assignment, and just these sisters who just keep doing the will of God day in and day out. No matter what they're asked, they do it with a smile, and they'll never let on whether it was something they enjoyed or not. It doesn't matter. It was what God was asking them to do. So those are the people that come to mind.
Great. When you talked about the Stations of the Cross, you talked about staying close to the sacramental life of the church. Any other bits of wisdom or things that you've learned about yourself that have worked for you in striving after a holy life?
The only other thing would be, of course, just the fidelity to prayer. This is the advantage we have as religious, right? So it's built into our horarium. We pray 3 hours a day, in addition to being in the active life, in an active apostolate. And I remember as a lay person, if I did a little devotional for 10 minutes while eating breakfast, I thought I was doing pretty good. And so
Guilty. I feel guilty.
yeah. But I mean, it's part of being in the state of life. Your
Right.
state of life my state of life is to pray. And I think, but the more fidelity we can have to prayer. I mean, I think the other part too is the power of the rosary. We didn't grow, even though my mom's a very faithful Catholic, but we didn't really grow up with Marian devotions in our family. And so it wasn't something I really became introduced to until I was a sister. But we do pray the rosary every day. And that's also Our Lady of Notre Dame is a powerful intercessor. It's not just a university in Indiana. She is a person. And so I think turning to her in those times of needs is important as well. But I think the basics is fidelity to prayer, just showing up, putting yourself in the presence of the Lord, and every day.
Well, it's clear to me that you have shown up for so many people, for the women in your community, but also the many people you've served in the apostolates that you've been a part of, and you do us proud. As a member of our alumni association, that you're really living out your vocation, and you've inspired me, and I'm sure a lot of the people that will hear this. So, Sister Mariana, thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk with me and share your story.
Thank you, Dan. Again, I appreciate the invitation, and I wish you well with the rest of your activities.
I appreciate that. Well, that concludes this episode of Everyday Holiness, a Faith Indie podcast. We always invite you to share these stories, to subscribe to the podcast, to rate it if you really liked this particular episode and others, as well as to subscribe to our Faith Indie Daily Gospel Reflection at faith.nd.edu/signup. We send a daily reflection written by a member of the Notre Dame family and notification of future episodes of the podcast. Thank you for being with us this time, and until next time, you'll be in our prayers. God bless.